So you were saying right before your car stopped somewhere. Where was that?
I was okay. I was like on the freeway, like one of those like houses that like literally are like right on the freeway.
Oh, you were on the freeway when it stopped.
Yeah. No, I was like going up. I went like up into the driveway and then went into the delivery. As I'm walking to the delivery, the like some like idiot truck is just like driving by. He drives too close to the right. And so there's like that puddle that's always like collecting when it rains.
Yeah.
Dumped a whole tank of water on me. Like I was soaked. And I go give the guy his like medication. I'm like, I'm sorry, it's a little bit wet.
So this is when it was raining
Yeah,
like a lot last week.
Yeah, this was like on Thursday.
Oh man.
And then like I don't have like a raincoat or anything, so I'm like wearing like a cotton t-shirt.
Yeah, yeah.
I go and I immediately like call Simone. She doesn't answer. I call Paul, and he like somehow answers, and I'm like complaining on the phone. I'm like soaking wet. It's freezing, like it's awful. And then as I'm saying that, I'm like backing out off the driveway into the freeway, and like my only thought as I'm doing this is like I just don't want a car to hit me because they're going like 65.
Yeah, it's the freeway. Yeah.
And then the car stops like halfway out of the driveway. And it felt like the car got stuck like in that little like drain thing. And then so I tried like revving the engine just to get the tires moving a little bit. Nothing. It just like it wouldn't even rev. It just stopped.
That's so interesting. So it hits the like wherever you got stuck and the engine just stops?
The engine just
stalls or something? I wish I knew more about cars so I could tell you.
So apparently it's the key. So apparently like the car never started to begin with. The reason like it like reversed out is because it was on an incline, and so it naturally reversed out. But once the tire hit that ditch, like it couldn't naturally fall anymore.
Okay.
And so like that was why like I didn't notice it until then. But some like we had like a fake like copy key.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I guess like those like stall after a while, so like wasn't like connecting to the computer in the car.
Oh.
So it was literally just they gave me a new key for the car, and that was it.
That's interesting. I'd never heard of it like linked to the key before. It's always like some issue with the engine you stall.
Whenever the mechanic came and he said that, I kind of just looked at him and I was like, okay.
Yeah, he's like making stuff up at this point.
Like,
no, it's clearly, the key. I wouldn't have believed him.
Because I was like, okay, my car stopped a week ago. I gave you my car. Okay, this is now like it had been like the third time I'd driven it since he gave me my car back, like from the week before when it stopped the first time, and now you're telling me, oh, the key's the issue. And when it stopped the first time, he like told me, like I came and got it the next day, and he was like, oh, like your car is fine, like the wheels are just like unbalanced.
So it was something different every time.
Like the first time I just lost control of the steering, and so it was like zigzagging like through the highway, like on Highway 6 on the way to College Station.
Did it disconnect from the wheel, or did the wheel like force your hands off of it?
And the wheel forced my hand off.
Oh.
So it just like I couldn't like, so even after like at that point, like it had hit that like ridge on the side of the highway that kind of like lets the driver know that they're going too far. And once it hits there, you can't control your car.
And so it does the opposite.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to make you wake up and get control of your car.
Yeah. And then
instead it just
I had like 3 trucks around me. I have no idea where they all went. Like as that happened.
Wow.
And I did the one thing you're not supposed to do, and I hit the brakes immediately. And I realized afterwards, like the car took like 30 seconds to stop. And like after it hit, I was like, I was not supposed to do that.
Man. Well, I'm glad you're safe. You're here now.
Guess what Paul was doing the whole time?
What?
Sleeping.
Oh, okay, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Didn't answer his phone. Called him 15 times.
Yeah.
His dad saw the call and woke him up.
Yeah, he's not going to be happy we're dissing him live on the podcast, but we can...
It's payback.
All right, so you had mentioned before we started, that what actually affects children after birth, because we're going to start getting into developmental psychology now, what actually affects the children after birth is not like the specific mood that the mother's in. Or could you re-explain that to me?
Okay, so there's like 2 different types of studies. There's like, so a lot of the studies done about kind of like the topic of like how a mom's like mood like affects the child are mostly like physical things. Like they say like the heart rate will spike, or like their like weight isn't as high as it should be, like so they're like suffering like physically because of that. But then there's like this was like one of the few studies that I found that was talking about like kind of like just like the child's like psychological development. And so that one was saying that like if the mom is depressed, the baby prefers for the mom to be depressed both before and after birth. And if the mom is healthy, she needs to be healthy before and after birth, because any shift in that causes the baby to be confused about like the nature of the world, because they're picking up on like life and like kind of like the way the society and stuff works, like from inside like the womb. So now you're telling me like the mom's depressed and she's like like binge eating and like crying, like that's like how the baby thinks the world is. And all of a sudden the baby's born and the mom is all happy, and like the baby's like, okay, like what's going on, like this wasn't how like my brain had been wired before. And so it like struggles to like develop at like a normal rate.
Interesting. So the baby is developing in a healthy way as long as the mom maintains the same, I guess, emotional state.
It's developing at a healthy rate. It's more about like the rate at which the child grows. Because if the mom is like anxious and depressed, like obviously the child has like the likelihood to be more anxious and depressed just because their heart rate is gonna like be much higher than a normal infant. And like that higher like heart rate is like linked to like signs of anxiety.
Okay.
But at least they're developing and like kind of like adjusting to the world at a normal rate. But if it's like different, then like if the mom is depressed before and then like after the child is born is healthy, the child's gonna have a healthier mindset, but they're gonna develop at a much slower rate than those around them.
Okay, so it's all about rate of development and not necessarily if they're developing in a healthy or non-healthy way.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So the mom's mood, what specific mood the mom is in would definitely affect like if the child is going to develop being anxious or if they're going to develop being like what we consider to be healthy.
Yeah.
But okay, interesting. I'd never heard that before, like where it can affect the rate of development. And where did you pull this study from?
This is from the Association of Psychological Science.
Okay. So kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
All right, interesting.
It is very cool. And it kind of like it brings into like attachment styles too. Like because so like there are all the studies done about like whether a child is born like anxious or like healthy or all that stuff. And so like if the baby's like born like in an anxious environment, like within like it's like developing like in the mom's womb that way, they're more likely going to be like an anxious attachment style. Like they're going to be like they know not to rely on their mom too much for like emotional attachment, just because they know their mom just can't give it to them. And so like they're gonna cling to their mom and they're gonna like want her to like calm him or her down, but they almost like know that the mom can't do it. Like she's unable to give the child the comfort that they need.
Interesting. So are there set definitions for what different attachment styles are out there? Like, or is this just a case-by-case basis where they're like, this is kind of your general attachment style between this mom and this child?
So they found that there's like 3 main attachment styles, and like you can usually tell, like I believe, like the attachment style around like in like a toddler, so like 1 or 2.
Okay.
And they'll put the child into like they'll take the child out of its home, and put it in like kind of like a room like this maybe, but like more childlike. It has like toys and stuff.
Okay.
And so the child's like already like slightly anxious because it's like this is a new environment, and like at that point the child doesn't like to be away from its mom, like and so you put the child in there and then you kind of like let it sit with the mom for a couple minutes, see if the child feels comfortable enough to like move away and play with the toys. And then you bring in a stranger. And the child will usually kind of like stop, maybe like go back to the mom a little bit, is like weary of the fact that there's someone that they don't know like now present in their room.
Yeah.
You let them adjust to that a little bit, see, like, are they going to continue to play with the toys? Or are they going to kind of like bring the toys, like, stay closer to their mom? And then the mom kind of just like gets up, waves to the child, and exits the room.
Okay.
And so, like, the baby is now like full, like, I'm extremely anxious, like, I have no idea what's going on. And they found that there's kind of, there's 3 attachment styles, like the healthy attachment style where the baby's gonna kind of cry a little bit. And then, like, they're okay though, like, they might calm down a little bit, like, if the mom's gone for long enough. And then, like, once the mom comes back into the room, they're going to kind of like let her comfort him. Like, they're gonna like run back to the mom and try and like and reach for her. And like once the mom like holds them and calms them down, they're gonna calm down like relatively quickly. And then there's like the avoidant attachment style where they're clearly upset because they have like a heart monitor like linked to these toddlers, to where like, you know, like the baby's upset because its heart rate just spiked. But it won't go to the mom. Like, the mom will walk back in after like 1 or 2 minutes, and it completely ignores its mom. It's like,
Wow. So even when the mom comes back, they're just like,
yeah, they're
still
like,
sitting there trying to deal with it by themselves.
Yeah, they won't turn to the mom for comfort. They don't like, and like that's someone that's like usually kind of like very independent, like in their life growing up. And the last one's like the anxious child, where they're going to like break down hysterically. Like, they just can't take the thought of the mom like not being with them. But even when the mom comes back, they won't calm down. Like, they're gonna go to the mom and they're gonna like cling to her, but they're not gonna calm down. Like, they're still going to be like pretty hysterical. It's gonna take a long time to calm this child down. And so kind of like that's kind of like what you see. And like, this is like both a reflection of like how the mom is treating the baby as like a fetus, like in her womb, and then also like how she treats the child like after it's born.
Interesting. And these are like 1 to 2 year olds, you're saying, that they're doing these studies with?
Yeah, they try and do it like after the child's 8 months old, because they start developing like stranger anxiety at that point, where like anyone that they don't know, they kind of like get scared and they want to be with their mom. So they're just waiting for that like phase in their development to start. Okay. And then they'll do that.
So this develops after 8 months, where they recognize like, this is a stranger I need to be very careful about.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this isn't inherent whenever they're first born. Like, this is,
no.
Obviously it would be like when you have like a baby who's just been born, it's hard to tell how they're responding to certain things. But
yeah. And even like earlier, like maybe even at 6 months, like I've babysat kids, like, and they're in my house, they're not in their own homes, and the mom just kind of like drops them off and leaves, like, you know, and baby's fine. Like, it's 6 months. It's like, it just wants to play. It just wants someone to care for it. It doesn't really care who.
Interesting.
But then I babysat that kid. Like, I hadn't seen that kid for like 2 or 3 months. The same thing happened. And the moment I pulled away from its mom, it started like reaching for her again.
Okay.
And so it's subtle, but it like happens relatively quickly. Within just a couple of months, you see that like complete shift in like attitude towards other people.
That's interesting. I had always thought it was inherent, like right from the get-go. They're always like very careful about anyone who's not their parents.
No, they'll know who their parents are.
Okay.
I mean, like, obviously, like, you know, like the kid like grew up in the mom's womb. Like,
yeah,
he's gonna be able to
it's a pretty tight
her.
attachment, right from the start. But
he won't know to like stay away from other people necessarily.
Okay.
He'll just want to return to her after a while.
Okay. Regardless of how the mom is acting to strangers, like if there's someone who like family friends who the mom is very comfortable with, and even at 8 months, are they still going to look at those family friends, the child, right? Or is the child still going to look at those family friends and be like, all right, now I'm not sure. Now that I'm 8 months old, this is kind of weird.
I mean, I don't entirely know, honestly, but I would assume that if it's someone that the child saw frequently, that they would.
Probably some sort of conditioning or something.
Because I mean, if they see a sibling, they're going to be fine. If they see their dad, they're going to be fine. So it just depends on how close that person is to their family.
Interesting. So in terms of those 3 attachment styles, so we've kind of seen at 1 to 2 years how they're behaving with those 3 attachment styles. But how do these attachment styles manifest later when they're older, like when they become adults?
We see that like people who are like the normal attachment style, they grow up like leading healthy relationships in their life. Like they're able to trust people. They like are like open up at a healthy rate. And you like see that like within their family, within their marriages, like all that. But then with a child that's like independent, like they're like the avoidant like attachment style, they're gonna grow up that same way. Like they're not gonna want to like they're the people that you meet that are very like, oh, like I don't open up, or like, you know, like,
oh yeah,
I don't cry. Like they're like those types of people where you're like, okay, like you clearly have emotions, but they won't ever let you in long enough to see them.
Yeah.
And then you have the anxious child who just, you know, like they want to trust you.
Yeah.
Like so they're either gonna like run into a relationship too quickly and get hurt, or they're just like they're going to be in a relationship. They're always jealous. They're always scared. Like, oh, like, what does this person think of me? I need reassurance, like, every step of the way.
Yeah.
And, like, I feel like it's usually pretty easy, like, when you're interacting with someone to, like, pick up on their attachment style. But there is research that's been done that says that it's easy, or not easy, but, like, it does happen frequent to where people can switch between the attachment styles. Usually, though, it's from, like, worse to better. And not the other way around, which is hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming as you like, because at 1 to 2 years, you're not done learning about life, clearly. Yeah. So you start to pick up things and you like may unconsciously see things about yourself and change behaviors. It's a thing that people do all the time. So, but it's very interesting to see like kind of at a base level, how these attachment styles affect kind of.
Yeah. And it's a lot based on like how the mom is with its child. Because like you start like developing, like you start seeing your fetus as a person like long before they're born.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to kind of like pick up on that stuff and you're like, okay, like the baby's kicking, like, you know, like maybe it's cold or something, you kind of bundle up, like being able to pick up on like what your baby needs at any given moment is going to play like a big factor in like how that child is going to become attached to you. Because if you don't know what your kid needs, and they're not going to turn to you when they need something.
Okay. Interesting.
And that relationship starts like before the child is born too.
So that was going to be my next question. Like we've seen how, you know, these studies kind of show how they interact as adults, but how do they get there even at 1 to 2 years old? And you're saying this starts way before, like in the womb, depending on how the mom.
Yeah, like it depends. Like, are you the mom who's going to kind of like sing your child like to your unborn child? And it kind of does go for both like males and females in a relationship. Like it's just easier to do the study with like a mom because you know the baby already like is attached to its mom.
Right.
But it's kind of like are you the parents going to talk to your child before they're born? Are you picking up on like, okay, like I ate this food and clearly the baby like something felt off when I ate this, let me not eat it again.
Yeah.
And then when a kid is born, like, are you picking up, like, when it cries, you know, the difference between a cry that it needs to be changed or a cry that it needs to eat or, like, you know, like, or it's, like, stomach hurts. Like, you need to be able to pick up on these things.
Interesting.
But they do say that 60% of people, like, 60% of mothers, like, are able to pick up on these, like, changes in the child.
Are able to, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is rare, and it definitely, like, manifests in kind of, like impoverished places was where you're going to see those numbers like kind of like shift more towards like unhealthy child development.
Yeah. Interesting. So clearly there's it's a lot more than just like don't smoke, don't drink alcohol. It's like very minute things. And I don't want people to get the impression that it's like, oh, you have to have an ideal like 100% perfect pregnancy for your kid to have any chance in the world, because nobody ever does, right? There are always things that happen, like,
and the mother's hormonal, like she's already going through it. Like,
I mean,
she doesn't need to be worried about doing everything correctly at any given moment.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think when my mom was pregnant with me, there was a hurricane going through Louisiana, so I don't know what that's gonna do, but I guess we'll find out. But I mean,
psychologically analyze you real quick.
yeah, I'm right here. What do you see? But nobody's ever gonna have an ideal pregnancy. But it is interesting to see just how those little things affect.
It's kind of like the first hint you see it, like this child's mental health? Like, how are they growing? Like, to like, what are the people that they're going to be kind of going to look like?
Yeah. And are there any situations in which that radically changes all of a sudden? I mean, I'm assuming there are, but I don't know how set in stone it is. Like, let's say you have that child who is anxious and breaks down, and even when mom comes in, they're still just breaking down and can't be comforted.
I think it just depends. Like, at that point, is the mother learning more about their child, and to the point where they're able to like understand what it wants more. But regardless, it is a slow process, especially for like an anxious child. They're already kind of skeptical of the people around them. So like, if the mom all of a sudden kind of like is like more attentive to them, they're gonna be like, "Wait, what's going on?"
Mm-hmm.
And they're not gonna really trust her. And then slowly, maybe like they're gonna be like, oh, "Okay, like she actually is like understanding me now and like what I need."
Okay. And does that manifest itself with other relationships as well? Like as they're older, they'll be more like, if they engage more trustingly with their mom, is that going to translate over to?
Yeah, they say like definitely the way the child is at home is going to be like how they are with other people. And obviously this isn't like 100%, like everyone is like this. Like there's definitely shifts. So you're just not as close with your parents, but you're able to form healthy friendships. Like that definitely does happen. But most of the time, like if you're avoidant with your family, you're going to be avoidant with your like significant other, with your friends or whatever.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So as you were going through these studies, was there anything that was like really crazy that stood out to you, or something that was way different than what we used to think about the way psychology works?
I think kind of like when I went into looking at this stuff, I was looking more to see at like how like certain parts of the brain are developing. And what I found is more like most of these studies are actually more of like, okay, like this is the physical shift in the child. So you see that like, okay, like a child that has a depressed mom, like they're going to be born much earlier. They're not going to weigh as much. They're not going to be like, they're not going to be a healthy infant. And like, if the mom is depressed, she's probably not going to be able to take care of her child like effectively, like after. And they're probably gonna like blame, like she's gonna blame herself, like, oh, I did this to my kid. Okay. So you're gonna see that like that decrease in health is gonna persist throughout that child's like early years, probably, unless there is that shift in health. And like obviously the father at that point will like play a role, like and just like, is the dad going to kind of step up to the plate and take initiative and kind of help them through it? But most of these like avoidant and like anxious styles are like single parents, like in like low income areas. So,
and that's been a huge topic of discussion recently. Like when you have a single mom, when you have a single dad, how does this affect the development of the child? And like, do you have any details about that? Is that something?
Honestly, no. It was mostly just kind of like physical things about the child. There are very like limited studies out right now about how like this child like mentally is growing, just because there's such longitudinal studies that it would be hard for any one person to track it for so long.
Yeah. For us to have information on it now, I think we'd have to be interested in it for a very, very long time. And
I think it would lead to pretty like surprising results. Like I think it would be like what parts of the brain are being more active during certain moments of the child's development.
And are these physical parts of the brain or more like mental maps? Like, what do you mean when you mention parts of the brain?
I do know that there are studies going on right now about tracking kind of like the way anxiety presents itself on an MRI.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So I'm sure that you could, I don't know how old a child has to be before you can put them in that kind of situation, or what parent is willing to do that even.
Yeah.
But you can definitely, like, I would assume that you could kind of do that same kind of technological mapping of the brain with an infant, kind of see, are those same areas like lighting up that we see in adults, or like even like fractions of it maybe.
But interesting. So we like maybe haven't done those studies, but is there any indication that those areas of the brain are different?
I think just kind of like in the way that a child knows like not to respond to its mom in a certain way. Like if a kid's not leaning towards their mom, like clearly something in their brain is like in overdrive where they're like, I don't trust her. Like there's like that fear stimulant that's happening. So I would assume that there should be kind of like a biological indicator of that. But like I said, I haven't been able to find any studies where they've actually been able to find like real hard facts for it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't imagine there would be a lot of very decisive evidence about it. Because again, you're saying there's a lot of, like just, again, who's going to put their kid in that situation? Like you're trying to find subjects for a study, like, hey, we need to.
And I mean, what IRB board is even going to approve for that to be done to a child that's like 6-7 months old?
Yeah. Yeah, go to a mother and be like, hey, you have a young child. Would you mind if we just scare the crap out of them really quick? We're just going to see what happens really quick. Yeah. You're not going to find any moms that are going to do that.
Especially because most moms don't even know, like, was I actually depressed during my pregnancy or was it just the hormones acting up? Like, we don't do those like mental health screenings that like the moms need to be doing because it does affect.
And that'd be a very intensive study for you to go back and be like, okay, you're like pregnant right now. We're going to map like all of your emotional states throughout the entirety of your pregnancy. And then like when your child's born, we're going to take whatever measurements. And then like at 1 and 2, we're going to do a study. We're going to put them in a room. And then after that, when they're adults, we're going to like do this whole,
and then control for like, like their siblings are rude to them or like the dad's not there or like, you know, they live in this sort of like socioeconomical situation. Yeah. There's like way too many like things that start kind of interfering.
Yeah, you're right. Even if you could keep up with somebody for like 50 years to map the entirety of their development, there's going to be a lot of factors that go in and you just have no clue. Is this a confounding factor? Does this not do anything? Like, it's very hard to run these studies. But it looks like they've been taking steps to kind of understand though, like you're saying. Like, have there been studies where maybe like a mild stimulus, like they're playing with a specific toy and they map the brain to kind of see?
They won't do so with like the infant just because I don't think IRB boards are okay kind of putting such an impressionable like child under kind of that like fear. But there have been studies where they will put the mom under like extreme like emotional pressures and they'll kind of put her like, okay, like this is like a dear friend of yours just died. And like they're doing this always in the most realistic way possible. Like she's going to think that
they don't know that they're in a study. Yeah,
they're gonna like genuinely believe that this person died and they're gonna see like the shift that they have towards their infant. Like, how are you now treating your child? And this is like before the child's even born too. So like, are you still taking care of your pregnancy? Like, are you still taking the vitamins that you need to be taking? Or are you just kind of like, I'm just completely depressed. I'm like, this is taking up all of my energy. And they see like, okay, like when your child is born, what is their attachment style now? This is a perfectly healthy mother who has like healthy mental health. Like she's doing all the right things. And then all of a sudden something awful, like out of her control happens. Like, just like you were saying with your mom, like hurricane happens. Yeah. How is that causing a shift in the way she handled her pregnancy?
That's why. And these studies are allowed where they just go and like.
Yeah. But these studies were done in like the 1950s, 1960s.
So back when this stuff was allowed.
Yeah, things are kind of a little iffy back then.
I was about to say, like, that doesn't seem like that would fly now.
Yeah, it doesn't seem better than putting the child in that situation.
Terrify a pregnant mother and then see, like, are they going to take care of their kid?
Yeah, like before the child's even born, like you're setting them up almost for failure. Like.
Yeah. Because, so now we know that has massive effects on the way the child develops. Yeah. So that's, I don't imagine now that would be okay.
Definitely.
All right. Anything else that you found that was like, that really stood out?
Not really. And most of it was kind of like expected. Like, you know that like if your mom was like not there, she's not going to be there. Yeah. If she's not eating good, like you're not going to be eating good. Like you're going to be kind of like at a disadvantage to everyone else.
Yeah. And this is very deep rooted as well, right? So where like let's say you tell someone like, hey, this factor occurred during your mom's pregnancy, and this is kind of your behavior now because of it. How much can that person consciously do to change that? Yeah. Is this like the way that they're wired, or is this something that they can really think and be like, okay, I can like do these habits to kind of break myself out of the way that I was developed in the womb?
I mean, it's definitely kind of in the hands of the child at that point.
Okay.
Like, are you able to still form friendships with people? But it's also kind of like, are you forming friendships with people that are kind of like reinforcing what your mom did? Or are they kind of like healthier friends, or like, like they're there for you and they're like, no, like you don't have to be like this anymore. Like we're going to keep showing up, and they really do show up.
Okay.
So like their interaction with their friends and their significant others can definitely have a shift. But usually if your mom's kind of like say like it's a mom in a poor kind of like income area, like the mom's kind of going to be busy all the time, like working. So that kid's going to grow up independent. And then it's not like they're going to be moving out of that situation like easily.
Yeah.
So they're going to be growing up with other kids who are who are also like come from poor families and who also have these avoidant styles of like attachment. So they're almost kind of like there's no like person that's kind of like dragging the group up, and like so it is difficult, but they do say that it's possible for that to happen.
So it can, but it just has a lot to do with the external environment and how that's playing a role in the continued development of that person.
I think it definitely speaks to like the importance of picking the right people that you're friends with and who you interact with, because you want people that are going to bring out the best in you. And like they've even found that there's children who like see their parents, like they idolize them, like the single mom who had to go to work every day, like work like 16-hour like shifts or whatever, like they like that child's going to grow up and they're going to appreciate their mom, and they're going to be like, oh, like she did everything for me. But then it's almost like the shock of like she did everything like for you, like to survive, but she like hindered your emotional development and stuff. And kind of it's like that realization that like there's a difference between being like a loving parent and kind of just a parent who fills the role of a parent. And there are like definitely like questionnaires that these people have gone through, like intensive questionnaires where you're like, oh, like did your parent do this? And it's something that like is positive, like, and then the kid finds out later this is something that's very detrimental to them in their development. You're like, oh wait, like maybe my parents aren't as great as I thought that they were. I think it's also important for a parent to look at those, like these questionnaires and like, am I doing these things that might show that I love my kid, but I'm loving them in a bad way almost.
Explain more of like what a bad way would look like.
Like a kid that's like brought up and they're like overhyped, and the mom's oh my god, like you're so amazing, like you got this, like, and they do everything for them, like the kid forgot their water bottle, like I'm gonna leave work, go home and grab this water bottle and drive it to my kid's school. Like these kids are gonna have no independence like when they're older. Or the parent that's always like, oh, like you got like a 90 on a test, not a 95. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, come on, like you can do so much better than this. Like, this is not your best. That might very well be that child's best. And they're gonna grow up kind of like overworking themselves and like. So it's like these are
overcritical
things,
of everything and
tough love is it's still love, but it's not really all that great for the kid.
There's a balance though, I think. Like either extreme, you're saying either extreme is bad, where it's like you're always praising the kid, like there's no criticism whatsoever. They could be, doing nothing or, having detrimental effects on the relationships around them, and they still think they're all that because, that's the way that they were brought up. But.
And it definitely brings up like different things. Like a kid that's overhyped is going to grow up to be like at least slightly narcissistic in their life. Like they're going to be like, oh, like no one's better than me. Like I'm like, I'm the best that there is. And then on the other hand, there's a kid who like doesn't like, no matter what they accomplish, it's like not enough for them. And so
they're going to come back and be like, oh, this little thing that I couldn't do, or like that time I stuttered in that conversation. Like this morning, I can't believe I did that, and just not able to.
They're just not going to be able to move on with their life. That's definitely difficult on that child. And all these kids like who like go through these questionnaires, like when they start, they're like, oh yeah, my mom was great. Like she loved me, she was amazing. Like, but it's kind of like, is she loving you correctly? And I think it's even more important, like, to do this less kind of with the children. Because I would fear that they would look at their parents now in a negative way, but give it to the parents and like, are you doing this? Like, what are you doing that's hurting your child?
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially like certain cultures, like especially like, you know, like in Egyptian culture, like we're pushed very harshly towards, you know, like you have to be the top of everything.
Yeah.
And like we see our parents like, oh, like they did everything, like they moved across like the world, like they like work so hard, but are these necessarily things that we need at that age?
Yeah.
So
I think it's like, it could also be like this, because what would we be, first generation or second generation?
yeah, I think first probably.
Okay, so first generation. So like, I don't know, kind of the attitude switch of like being the generation that always lived in Egypt versus being the generation that moved from Egypt to America,
like that half and half.
versus being the generation that like was always, that had been born and raised in America. And it's kind of like, are there differences in what you need to be teaching your child for them to succeed in this specific society or this specific culture? And we might be going in like really deep, but it's just curious. I'm curious to see, because there are always things I'm hearing, like whether it's my parents or other parents in our like Egyptian community, and I'm like, I don't know if that applies here.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm a kid, so I don't know. Like,
I think kind of growing up, you have to give your parents a chance. Like there's things that my parents told me that at the time, like I was like, what are you talking about? Like there is no way that this is how things are. And kind of growing up, I'm like, okay, I kind of see your point now.
mm-hmm.
And it just depends kind of to what extreme are you willing to take it. Like kind of like with the example of trying to think, kind of like a way someone dresses, like, you know, like in Egypt, like you're told like, hey, like you got to be covered up at all times. Like, there's no exception to that. Like,
yeah,
you have to be respectful of the culture that's there. And even like when I go back to visit, I have to be mindful of like what I'm wearing. And then kind of that shift to here, like you see kind of like that culture being brought into America where we're being told to like, oh, like cover up. And you're like, well, you know, like it's 100 degrees outside. Like I want to wear shorts. It's hot.
Yeah, it's Texas. Like we live in a swamp.
Yeah, but I see like parents where they're like, no, like you cannot, absolutely not wear shorts like in the summer.
Yeah.
And like even in their houses, like if they have like guests over, and like this is like another female that I'm sitting with, like
yeah.
And I go to her house and her parents are like, no, you gotta put pants on, like no shorts.
Yeah.
And then kind of like at what point, like yes, like you know, you don't need to have like, you know, like all the like the shorts that are like all the way like, you know, showing everything, but like maybe kind of like a mid-thigh short or something. It's kind of like that shift of like, we're not in Egypt anymore, but you want to hold on to the traditions and the respect that was there.
Yeah.
But also like you want to adapt to the culture here and also adapt to what your body needs.
Yeah. Yeah. That's always like a tough line to draw, because it's like what's cultural and what's like,
yeah,
what is actually going on.
Yeah. Like what is right and wrong and what is kind of just there because people said it's there, and just kind of like nodding your head and you're like, okay, cool, let's do it.
Yeah, there are things I look back now and I'm like, that still doesn't make any sense. And then there are things I look back, like there are things I look back and I'm like, my parents would tell me to do things and I'm like, I have no clue. I'm just going to listen to them because I like don't feel like fighting whatever it is.
It's not worth the headache that you're going to get afterwards.
And then now I look back and I'm like, I'm so happy I listened to them. And that seems so obvious, but at the time I was 100% sure my parents were drinking dumb juice. Like there's no, like I'd be there like, there's no way you're asking me to do this. There's no way.
This is ridiculous. Like, are you serious? Like, do you even know like where you are right now?
Yeah. And then turns out it was literally just the logical thing to do. And I didn't have any logic because I was a 14-year-old boy and literally was out to ruin everything.
I think it's definitely kind of that mentality of like, advice is freely given but not freely taken.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to listen to it. You have to give it a chance.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
Because it could be wrong, like for you or for the situation that you're in. And it goes back to parents not like the term I think is like a lawnmower parent who they're just doing everything for their kid. Like I'm setting the rules. You're doing this exactly the way that I tell you. Like even up like the article that I saw was like a professor who was like on like CNN or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that like he had a parent like come in and was like arguing with him about this girl's grade, and the girl was kind of just hiding behind her mom. He's like, this is a 20-year-old child, like, you know, like she's an adult, she's about to go into the real world, she needs to be able to handle the situation on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And she just couldn't do it. Like she just had, her mom just had to come and do it. And like he didn't know if the child had asked her mom to come and interfere, if the mom just kind of did it herself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that like, okay, you have to let your kids make their own mistakes. They have to grow.
Yeah.
Or else they're always going to look at you as like kind of that like shadow, like that's always telling them what to do, and they're never going to grow into their own person.
Yeah. That's a very tempting thing for parents, where it's like, you know, the child makes a mistake, or like they get a really bad grade on something, or something happens in class, and then now they have to go talk to the teacher or the professor or whatever, whoever it's going to be, to like figure out how they can fix it. And then the parents are just like, no, we'll do it. Like, you're going to get a good grade on this, or like, we're going to fix whatever happened in class. Don't worry. But it's like,
and I see it in college too, like kind of like with like some of my friends. I'm like, okay, like there's some people who clearly just don't know how to do anything. Like, you know, like I love them to death and all that, but you clearly don't know like how to do like the simplest thing, and they always need to ask and double ask, and like at some point like they still call their parents. They're like, oh, can you like look this up for me? Like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, there's people who like I can tell like they did it like on their own.
Yeah.
And like they'll still go back and kind of like, oh, mom, dad, like I did this, like what do you think? But at the end of the day, like they're like, okay, like I listened to you and appreciate you putting your input in and all that, but now I'm gonna do what I want, like with all the cards on the table.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, there's a huge difference between like, I'm stuck, save me, and like, hey, I'm trying to make a decision on XYZ. Like, what are you thinking? What's your opinion on this? And then like still balancing that and the opinions of other people, or what other factors. And yeah.
I think it'd also be kind of cool to see like take these kids back to when they were 2. What was their attachment style back then? Like how is this child who's overly dependent on their mom? Like what were they back then?
Yeah.
And kind of how did that grow?
Yeah. And that's kind of how we started this conversation. Yeah. Like, how do we see these manifest later? But yeah. Is that something you ever see happening, where they, you know, at 1 to 2, they run this test on you one time and they just kind of see your attachment style, and then that's like medical information or something?
I think it should be medical information. I think a lot of these psychological things should definitely be like in your medical history, and because it's also going to be kind of like when you're speaking to your patient, like how are you going to talk to them? Like what is your bedside manner with them?
Interesting.
Like, so, do you know like how to like communicate information to where you're not going to freak them out?
Yeah.
Or are you just going to like you know, you're gonna like drive this person insane, like, oh, what do I have, like, you know?
So even from a clinical perspective, it's like, do I carefully develop like what I'm trying to communicate with them so they can understand what I'm saying, or do I just hit them with it and
let them
like
deal with
let
it,
them
like
deal with it? Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Clary, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, we'll do a part 2, because there were some things that I do want to develop more, but we both have to do our research before we do something like that. But again, thank you so much, and we'll do this again.
I'm very looking forward to it.
All right. See you guys.